I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story, where I consult, teach, coach, and speak on the applied science and bewitchery of brand and business storytelling, so that you can clarify your story to amplify your impact and simplify your life.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
This past Thursday, in the community room over at the Phoenix Better Business Bureau, 18 business leaders gathered for our first public Business of Story Masterclass. It was a blast. The half-day session kicked off an 8-week deliberate practice program that they're going through right now to help them excel through the stories they tell. But the transformation into becoming a confident and influential communicator only works if they become intentional storytellers using the 3 Primal narrative frameworks that we coach. The first one I teach is how to focus your message by establishing its theme with the and, but, and therefore, or ABT structure that I learned from my friend Randy Olson. You can learn how to use the ABT in your brand and business storytelling by listening in on Randy and my conversation from last week's episode. He has just come out with a brand new book called Narrative is Everything, the ABT Framework and Narrative Evolution, which shows you how to apply the ABT to evolve your brand and excel as a communicator yourself. The second of the 3 proven story structures I teach is what I call the 5 primal elements that make up every story. You use these short stories to support the theme you've created with your ABT through more specific detail and nuance as shared through a true story well told. Now, where did the 5 primal elements of story come from? Well, they were inspired by what I've learned from Sean Callahan and Mark Shank of Anecdote, a Melbourne, Australia-based story consulting firm for leadership and sales. Now, in full disclosure, I am a certified consultant for their Storytelling for Leaders training program, and it is marvelous, I got to tell you. You can hear both Sean and Mark on earlier Business of Story episodes. So, what do the 5 primal elements of story include? They include a timestamp. When did the event in your story occur? A location stamp. Where did it happen? A central character that your audience can relate to, action with a surprise outcome, and finally, the aha moment that is taught through the telling of this anecdote to make your business point. You know, as you probably have heard me say several times on the show, stories always trump your opinion and your assertion because people cannot argue with a true story well told. If you combine these two together, starting with an ABT to focus your theme, and then follow that with an anecdote that uses the 5 primal elements of story, this is like an incredibly powerful 1-2 punch to hook your audience right from the very top and coax them into action through a compelling story. And you don't need much time to make this story wizardry work. We're talking a 1 or 2 sentence ABT followed by an anecdote that can be as short as 30 seconds. Nothing epic here, as is proof by today's guest, who is using the 5 primal elements of story in an extremely engaging way to teach leaders how to tell short stories when everything is on the line. Kymberlee Weil has been around the TED Talk movement since its early days, and she sat through more than 600 presentations around the world, so she's seen the best in action. She is the producer of TEDx Santa Barbara and a sought-after international speaker and trainer who has coached more than 300 TED speakers. She admits that she's obsessed with the art of high-stakes, short-form speaking and storytelling. Her mastery of martial arts and improv have also sculpted who she is today as an acclaimed story sensei. Leaders seek out to learn how to tell a quick tale when there is no room and no time for error. You'll learn from Kymberlee on today's show why high-stakes, short-form storytelling is driving business today, how to master the art of owning any room with your anecdotes through story, structure, and staging, and Kymberlee's going to share her version of the 5 primal elements to every story, including setting, snap, struggle. Well, I'll leave the rest to her on this masterclass edition of the Business of Story. Kymberlee, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
High stakes, short form stories. Now, that's a really interesting place to niche yourself. How did you become the go-to person for high stakes, short form stories?
It all started with TED, and I have been involved with TED for many, many years, way back since 2003. And back then, my first experience with TED actually had nothing to do with stories or the stage. It turned out to be a story, but it had nothing to do originally. And so I was in the computer industry, and I would have loved to have gotten invited to go to TED back then in 2003, but it was completely out of my league. So that was when TED was just an event that happened only once a year in one location. That was Monterey, California. And I was at a networking event, and I met this guy, and I had this idea for a software application I wanted to create. And I met this guy that I had met at the networking event. We got together for lunch a few weeks after this event, and I told him this idea I had. And all of a sudden, the napkins came out, and we started scribbling our ideas about this software application that could change industries. And then the lunch ended. And he went home to his house, and I went home to my house. And then a few days later, my phone rings, and it's this guy. And he says, Kymberlee, guess what? My friend at Macromedia is sponsoring TED this year. So they get to do something cool to showcase their technology, but they weren't sure what they were going to do. So I pitched him our back of the napkin idea. And Kymberlee, we're going to build our software idea for TED. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to TED. Wait, am I going to TED? Really? Here I am, this girl who is in the technology industry, but I'm very young in the technology industry, and I could not believe that I would be on the world stage. And all of a sudden, the doubt
started to creep in.
Yes. Like, who am I to be in front of these thought leaders and world leaders with this software idea that I had? But I love to do things that scare me. So I said, okay, I'm in. And we had 8 weeks to build this thing. I didn't even know this guy. We didn't have a team behind us. And somehow, some way, we made it happen. And it turned out to be a huge success. So much so that
and what were you building? Were you building?
It was a software application.
So you were actually building the app, and you had 2 months to do that.
Yeah, we had 2 months to do it, and we didn't know each other, and we didn't have a team, and we were in front of the TED audience and the TED attendees. At TED, you can't sell. You can't push products or services, but what you can do is create an experience for the attendees. And so our software was a matching technology, and it matched on 168 different attributes, and it showed you at TED who were the 10 people that you needed to meet based on your skills, your background, your personality, what you're working on. So this was way before Facebook was up and running and way before LinkedIn was going. Back in 2003. And so we made connections purposeful, which is kind of what TED does. It takes ideas and makes them matter in the world and then explodes them exponentially throughout the world.
So your software was set up such that you would put in the information about what you're doing and what you're working on, whatever, and it would then reach out into the network and find 10 people somewhere around the world that you need to be connecting with to make this happen?
Yes, although it was all originally for TED. So it showed you
just
at
for
TED.
Oh,
just
people
for TED.
Sitting in the room.
Yes, from those 800 or 1,000 people at TED that year, who were the 10 people that you were most like that you should meet, or that you were most opposite with that you would also want to meet for different purposes. And so it had all these matching algorithms. It was very visual and very experiential. And so this first experience with TED launched a software company for me by accident. And then that napkin boy I mentioned, we fell in love. And so Ted's responsible for a husband as well. Thank you.
Who goes by Napkin Boy. I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
So are they still using your app today?
So they used it for many, many years. And
What was
then
it called?
it's called Intro Networks. It's actually we still have the business. So Intro Networks. And it's went on to be used with some of the world's largest advertising agencies. You know, they have 10,000 employees across multiple companies. And how do we find the 20 people we need to put together to form a team to pitch Nestle, for example? Or anytime we've used it with NASA, matching STEM educators with scientists to work. I mean, it's been quite a ride.
Sounds pretty cool. So this was all happening for you on the TED stage back in 2003 when TED was really getting going.
Well, TED has been around for a long time. TED started in 1985, I believe. And so TED has been around, but it was this private club that it was invite only. And so TED started putting TED Talks online much later, and then allowed for TEDx events much later. And so TED has evolved. But back then, it was just one event once a year.
I got you. So then what happened? You went on stage, you gave your TED Talk, presumably?
Well, actually, it was not a TED Talk. So this was creating an experience for the attendees.
Oh, so you weren't speaking. I got you. Okay.
No, that's why I was saying it had nothing to do with the stage. It was just this technology. It launched a software company, launched my addiction with TED, launched my love affair with the husband, you know, all of these wonderful things. And then we started going to the TED conference year after year after year, and it was life-changing every single year. We'd look forward to TED all year. And then when Chris allowed us to create our own independently organized TED events, which are called TEDx. So the X stands for the independently organized TED event.
Were you one of the first to do that?
Yeah, we were in the early days of that. Yes. So we did a TEDx event in Santa Barbara, 2010, 2011, and 2012. And then we retired from running TEDx events because that was our give back to the world and to the community. Because when you run a TEDx event, it's 100% volunteer effort. So you're not allowed to write yourself paychecks. It's all for the good of the world and spreading ideas in the world. And we did that, and we were putting so much focus on our give back to the world that we really needed to refocus on our software company. And as soon as we decided to retire from running TEDx events, my phone started ringing and people started asking me, "Oh, Kymberlee, you're not running your own TEDx event. Can you coach all the speakers at my TEDx event?" And I said, "Okay, I guess." And they said, "And we'll pay you." Oh, interesting. So that you're allowed to pay speaker coaches for your TEDx events. And so for my own event, I'm not allowed to do that. Although I can work as a speaker coach for other TEDx events. And I started coaching speakers all over the world for TEDx talks coming up and working with TEDx events, working with their entire speaker lineup. And so at this point, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. And you've coached like over 300 speakers from around the world.
Yeah, just in the TEDx world and even on main stage TED. And that, doesn't count all the other speakers I work with. But what has happened is besides that, and then I've seen over 800 live TED Talks over the years at the main TED event. And all that is a lot of TED.
It's a ton of TED.
It is a lot of TED. But what's great about that is it translates into all these miles that I've run that are directly related to now what I do in the world. And that's my focus on high stakes short form talks, high stakes short form stories, high stakes short form speaking in general, and communications.
In anything in short form usually comes in what, like 20 minutes or less?
Yes. In my world, a short form talk is 20 minutes or less. In the TED world, it has to be 18 or less. What we're seeing in the industry is a decrease in the watching of the 18-minute talks and an increase in the watching of the 12-minute and below talks.
I did my very first, my one and only TEDx
Yes.
last year, TEDx
Yes.
Gilbert, and
Yes.
I was coached by Tamsin Webster. You may know Tamsin. She is just amazing, and I worked with her and her red thread method. And she said the same thing. She said, "Park, since this is your first one, why don't you come in and do a 8 to 12-minute one?" And I said, "Hey, I'm completely down with that." So we wrote it. We got there, and I took it in. And Jen, who was producing her very first TEDx event, said, "Oh no, Park, since you are a professional speaker, we have you as the anchor position in the last, and we really need an 18-minute out of you." And I go, "But the trending is the other way. You want me to do?" And they said yes. So I ended up actually adding to my talk, and then carving it back down to 18 minutes. And when I ultimately gave it, I think I went over my 18 minutes. But yeah, it was fun. It was quite a life-altering experience. It took me several months to really get it dialed in, wrote it, rewrote it, thought I had it all set to go, only with 10 days left to go. That Jen, the producer, said, I think you can do better. And I trashed it and started all over again. So I don't know if that's usual in your world, but that's what I experienced.
Yes. Well, it's life-changing every time. And in fact, I worked with all of the folks at TEDx Gilbert this year.
You did?
Yeah, coaching the speakers this year. And Jen and the team there are amazing.
Aren't they incredible? A family takes that over. I had her on the show about this time last year, and she shared what she went through in producing her very first TEDx event. It was really fun. She is a terrific person. Her whole family is amazing.
I agree.
So let's get into your method. Actually, before we do that, I want to take a little bit of a detour because I'm curious how these two worlds of yours intersect. So you are also a martial artist. And in fact, your old website was Strategic Samurai. And now you have a new beautiful website with your name, Kymberlee Weil. Take us to what's the story behind the martial arts, and how does it then play into how you think and coach about high stakes, short form storytelling?
Perfect. Yes. So I've been a martial artist for about 25, 26 years now. And I got started in martial arts also kind of by accident. I was living in Hawaii at the time, and I was peer pressured by a friend of mine who had a dojo and kept bugging me and saying, "You got to try martial arts." And at the time, I was a softball player. I had a full ride scholarship to play softball for University of Hawaii. And I thought, no, I'm not playing. I'm not going to go do martial arts. I'm a softball player. How dare you think that, and martial arts is for those other people. And he kept bugging me. And he said, "Okay, if you just try one class, I'll leave you alone." I said, "Okay, fine. One class." Tried that, and I haven't stopped since. And martial arts has had such an impact on my life in so many different ways. And as the years have gone on, I've done a variety of different styles of martial art. My main martial art is Hapkido, which is a Korean martial art. A lot of weapons work. And I've done Muay Thai. I've done several years of training in Muay Thai, Jeet Kune Do, bunch of different styles of martial arts, because they all can add value. They all have their benefits to it. And I did about 2 years of work with a traditional Japanese sword master. So we did live blade sword fighting, and that was something. And all of the martial arts influences my outlook on storytelling, particularly in TED Talks, absolutely, because of the cutting, right? So this as a TEDx speaker, you have to cut. In your case, you got to build back up. In most cases, though, we have to cut. And even in short form storytelling, there's so much information that people want to have in these stories. But in a TED Talk, if you're, let's say, opening with a story, you only have maybe 2 minutes or 1 minute or 3 minutes max to get your story out and move on to the next idea. And so with martial arts, the samurai did not mess around with their sword cutting. If it's a kill strike, it's a kill strike. There's not a lot of extra.
Talking about high stakes.
Right, exactly. And that's how I think of the short form storytelling is what can we cut? These TED Talks, what can we cut? What really matters the most? And what else can just be cut away and let go? And perhaps saved for a longer story in another venue.
And so you help your speakers come in, and I imagine these are people that are just like brand new to this. They get invited out of nowhere. And you imagine work with very professional speakers and everyone in between.
Yes, it is a variety. When I work with TEDx events who bring me in, a lot of times they've done their speaker selection. So they present me with the speakers they've selected. And yes, there's a variety of levels of proficiency in speaking. And other cases, people will find me because they were invited to do a TED Talk or TEDx talk and want to train in that lead up to it.
And you've got this overarching canopy. I guess you work under number 1, tell your story. Number 2, learn effective structure. And number 3, master unforgettable staging. But you also now have this new methodology that you have worked out over many years of training that has this 5-step to high stakes short form storytelling. Can you take us through that just as if like you're coaching me? All right. So our
Sure.
listeners are listening in.
Yes.
Saying, I just got on the phone. Kymberlee, oh my God, I've got 10 days to knock it out of the park with a 10-minute TED Talk, and I want to do it on storytelling. Where do we go from here?
One of my favorite questions to ask is, what if it were simple? Imagine taking all of the ideas in your mind and all of the stories that you have to work on and condensing it down into that one story that you're going to work on. And how can we make it simple? So in watching over all of these TED Talks that we've talked about, over 800 live talks, I've seen patterns, and I've seen patterns in what works for simplifying information. And also as an improv performer, because I do that as well. So I've got the martial arts, I've got the improv, a lot of stage time and a lot of perspectives that came into play here. I wanted to challenge myself to say, how can we use story structures that we know and love, like Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey? How can we take these beautiful methodologies that are out there that are very, very effective and condense them down into just the 5 elements that you must have? If you don't have one of these elements, you don't have a story. And so here they are. First, setting. So step 1 is setting. We have to know where you are. And I love it when the setting is present tense. So in these stories, instead of something that happened in the past, bring us into this world. In improv, when we walk out on stage and all eyes are on us, instantly we have to allow the audience to believe that we are in a world. We're in a kitchen. We are washing our hands. We have to take the audience into that setting, into that world. And this is the status quo. So this is what's going on. This is what's normal. And the details here matter so much. The more details that you have here, even in a short form story, the better. And by short form story, we're looking at 3 minutes or less. So I want to know the characters. I want to know, is it nighttime, daytime? Is it hot? Is it cold? All of those details come into play when you have your first step, and that's the setting.
And can I ask you, you said you like it to be present. Do you mean present day, or do you just mean you describe it with such specifics that it makes your audience feel like they are present in that moment, even if that moment happened 100 years ago?
Yes, it's the latter. So even if that moment happened 100 years ago, I want to be in that scene with you right now. So instead of I was washing my hands at the kitchen on a Saturday morning back in 2010, instead you would say, I'm at the kitchen sink and I'm washing my hands. It's September 2010, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's all in the moment. That's
I
what
love
I meant.
that. Because you made me cringe there for a second. I thought about my talk last year and thought, oh my God, I told about when my mother was, a little kid, 4 years old, waiting for her baby sister to be born in a cold hospital waiting room in Wenatchee, Washington. And then I realized, oh, good, it's okay. It happened 80 years ago, but I did try to make people present in what it felt like to be in that cold, forbidding hospital waiting room.
Sure.
Yeah,
And
okay.
Now you can use this for your next TED Talk, Park, because there's no rule that one person can only ever do one TED Talk. So
that's exactly right. So we've got setting. What's number two?
Setting. So number 2 is snap. Now what snap means, SNAP, snap. This is your inciting incident. So you're in the status quo, you're in your setting, everything is fine, and something happens. So this is your defining moment. Something happens that is different than the status quo. And going back to improv, what we call this in improv is the first unusual thing.
That's what Campbell would call something that turns your world upside down. That call to adventure, that all of a sudden your status quo no longer works for you and you find yourself in a whole new place.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And we love that moment. We love that first unusual thing. In improv, that's what often will get a laugh or get a gasp or get, people will pay attention to that one incident, that one unexpected thing that happens. So that's number 2. We have to have that.
I love that improv term, by the way, the first unusual thing. I think that's because it's also suggestive of, hold on, you've got some more unusual things coming your way.
Yes. Okay. Fancy term. Okay, so number 1, setting. Number 2, snap. Number 3, our favorite one of all, struggle. If you don't have struggle, you don't have a story. We have to have the struggle. So after that first unusual thing happens, now we've got a conflict. We've got an obstacle. We've got a roadblock. Something happens that you react to that first unusual thing in some way, shape, or form. It may be internal feelings that you have towards that unusual thing that happens. So back to improv as an example, when I'm on stage and that unusual thing happens, I'm washing my hands and my husband throws a dish towel at me. That's an unusual thing that might happen. I have to have how do I feel about that in that moment for the struggle? Am I going to be playful? Is it going to be, he's playing a game and that's fun? Or am I going to be angry at him and have a point of view there? So that struggle, we want to know what's going on in your mind. What are your internal feelings about that struggle? And the more that you can tell us, the better.
So that struggle on stage, as you're describing it, may be something that looks external or first appears external to your audience, but what they're really curious about is how you're reacting to it internally.
Yes. Yes, it's both. And so it could be just with what I do physically. If he throws a dish towel at me and I laugh and throw it back at him and it starts a game, that's one thing. If he throws it at me and I throw a pot back at him, again, this is improv, so no one's getting hurt here. Right. But that's a different reaction to it. So there is a struggle of some kind. A lot of the people that I work with, in the work that I do, these are real stories, real short. So they're real stories that matter. So I'm working with veteran suicide issues, or we're working with human trafficking. We're working with ocean issues. A lot of these TED Talks, these are people talking about things that matter in our world today. So these stories are usually very deep and very personal. And so that struggle, again, it goes into your mind of how did you feel about that unusual thing that just happened? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Were you frightened? Were you excited? What was that struggle for you?
Interesting. Okay. What's number 4?
Number 4 is shift. So after that struggle, something changes. This is an opportunity where you make a decision, you have a mindset switch, something changes in you in relation to that struggle. In improv, we call this the tilt. So in the struggle, usually in improv, you heighten it, and then it breaks. There's a tilt. Something breaks and there's a shift. Storytelling, a lot of times with these short stories, is after we know that struggle, the conflict that happens in the story, there is that shift in you. You have an insight. You have a perspective change. Something switches in you. Something changes.
Got you. I'm just making mad notes here as we go. All right, number 5.
And number 5 is success. And it's not success in necessarily the literal terms. It doesn't necessarily mean everything's rosy. What success means is you learned a lesson that you can now teach. You gained insight that you never had before. There's something, because of the shift in your mindset, now this is something that you can go on and share with others. This is something that is a realization that you never had before. It's information, a point of view that you had not seen until you went through step 1, 2, 3, and 4.
So you've basically boiled down the 17-step hero's journey down to these 5 core principles. That's, you start in your ordinary world, something happens that throws you out of that.
Sure.
Struggle then ensues. You learn something through this struggle that shifts your perspective, and you return back to the ordinary world with this boon, this new insight that you're trying to share with your audience.
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I love how quickly you can boil it down.
Right? What if it were simple, right? 5 steps. What if it were simple? Setting, snap, struggle, shift, success. That's it. If you map your story to these 5, you can tell a short form, you can tell a 1-minute story, you could tell a 2-minute, 3-minute story, and you're off and running, and your audience will love you for it.
Can I put you on the spot and have you tell us a story that you've told before using these? As if we're sitting there in the audience in 2 or 3 minutes, however long you want, that we could hear it in action?
Sure. And actually, the TED story had all of these elements in it that I told earlier. And here's another one. And I'll call out where I am so that we can follow along. So, setting. I have a full ride scholarship to the University of Hawaii. It's my freshman year. I'm cramming for finals, and my roommate and I decide to go have a break and go get a bite to eat. Snap. I was hit by a cement truck on my moped. Struggle. I wake up in the hospital 5 days later. All I can think about is I have trained my most of my life. I've been a softball player since age 7. Softball was my life. Being a pitcher was who I was. It defined me. All I could think about is I have to get back on that mound. But I'm laying in a hospital bed, but I have to get back on that mound. I don't even know who I am without softball. So, shift. I did the only thing I knew how to do. I made it a game. I played a game. I didn't tell them how bad it was. I didn't tell them about the numbness and tingling down my arms. The doctors said that I was going to need plastic surgery on my face, and my cranial nerves were destroyed, and all of these terrible things that happened to me. And I also lost my sense of taste and smell as a result of this injury because it was all head injuries. Though I made a decision that I was going to do whatever it took to get back on that mound. And so I played this game, and I just trained harder than I had in my entire life. And I treated everything like a game so that I could challenge myself in ways where the doctor said, you're not going to be able to do this. I was able to do this. The doctors said, you're probably not going to be able to pitch again. I was able to pitch again. And success, I will never forget the being back on that mound for the very first time after the accident and hearing that sound of the ball hitting the catcher's mitt. I was back. But was it the best game of my life? No, it wasn't. It wasn't the best game at all. But what matters is I got back on that mound. I learned the art in that whole experience of playing the game and making it a game and making it more interesting, making it a challenge for myself. And in fact, even to this day, I love to name my years. So instead of New Year's resolutions, I love to name my years based on who I want to be, not who I am today. And it just so happens that this year, I've named my year the year to make it more interesting. And that was influenced back from that softball experience, because in order to play the game, I had to make it more interesting for myself and do what most people would not be willing to do to get back on that mountain.
Wow. I mean, that was such a great story. As you were going along, I was sitting here wanting to react and throw an ooh and an ah and an e, and I had to literally shut myself up because I just wanted you to keep going with it. But I mean, viscerally, you were in my head. I was like, that was really cool. But what an awful thing you had to go through. But you came out the other end a smarter, wiser, stronger person.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And, it's been many years since that happened. I still don't have my sense of taste or smell, though my other senses are heightened. And when it comes to martial arts, that works out because my sense of awareness is heightened. And so when I'm in a knife fight, for example, I that's just one of my specialties is knife fighting, sword fighting. And so as you do,
I was
right?
going to say, my love for hamburgers and French fries gets in the way of my knife fighting. So
Does it?
I think it's probably because I still have my olfactory, senses working for me. So this is a really cool program. I love how you have simplified it and able to teach it. What are the biggest stumbling blocks your clients, your speakers have when you're trying to get them to embrace this, to follow it, to understand it?
Well, this just happened. I was working with one of my mastermind members, and they will skip the steps. That everyone likes to go straight to the struggle. And so I was working with one of my clients, and he was talking about a story about when his wife left him. And, it was just, he went from, my wife said she was leaving, and my life was over. I had no idea what I was going to do next, and I didn't know where I would go from here. And I just felt like everything had just crumbled all around me. And that's okay, but that's not a fun story to listen to. But instead, if he went back and included step 1 and 2, and he did something like, so it's Thursday morning, and I'm sitting at the breakfast table eating my frosted mini wheats with my wife, and she looks up from her orange juice and she says, "I'm leaving you."
Oh, snap.
Right? So that's so much more fun to listen to. And it's true.
Fun. Yeah. It's sad, but you're right. You're right. It's way more engaging.
But that's a better word. Thank you. It's more engaging. For an audience, the audience loves being a part of the experience. Instead of you talking at us, involve us in your stories so that we can be a character within your story, a invisible, silent character within your story. Audiences love that. So that's one of the biggest mistakes, is skipping these steps, or, even as short as these steps are, as simple as they are, people tend to skip them.
Kymberlee, we as human beings and Homo sapiens, one and the same, are storytelling monkeys. I mean, that's what makes us who we are, makes us human. Why is it, do you think, when we get in front of an audience or in front of a boardroom or in business, that we leave out our most primal and powerful storytelling talents and default back to just, here's a quick setup and let's get to the chase and here's what I need you to do next? Why is that? Why don't we employ these talents that are giving us that really connect with an audience and bring them in?
I think a lot of that has to do with our own mindset and being judged. And I know a lot of the people that I work with have that. It's a fear that people will judge me. These are the thoughts that come into people's minds. I don't matter. My story doesn't matter. I'm just going to go right to the facts because the facts are the facts and they stand for themselves. But, if I tell a story, they're going to think less of me. Or if I'm vulnerable and I expose myself, it's not appropriate in this setting, where I would argue that 100% of the time.
And do you see that changing? the
Yes.
Brene
Yes.
Brown.
Brene Brown.
Thank you. I can't say that
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
It's late in the afternoon.
That's okay.
She, talking about vulnerability, she's the one that really put the stake in the ground for vulnerability and is inviting that into all bureaucracies and businesses.
So true. And in fact, the original 3 TED commandments included that. So the original 3 TED commandments were these: tell a story you've never told before, don't sell, and be vulnerable.
And I suppose 1 and 3 are totally connected. Chances are you've never told that story because you're afraid it was making you vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. People all the time. And oftentimes the story that we don't want to tell is the one that will serve our world the best.
Mm-hmm.
And so many of these stories are in service to others. If we are willing to let the shields down and share the stories that matter deeply to us and the stories that are very, very personal and vulnerable, it can not only change, but sometimes save someone's life.
That is so true. I mean, yeah, not just change, but could save them if you
I've seen
change their perspective,
Yes, absolutely.
I was thinking about this yesterday. I don't even know where it came from, but you've been on the stage a lot. I'm on the stage a lot. And when you're up there, you're really hoping to move the entire audience, but you're not going to. And even with that wish of having that kind of impact on the masses, I can't tell you how rewarding it is if I have just one person come up out of that and say, oh my God, that was exactly the message I needed to hear right now. You don't know the difference that that's made in my life. Or if I, get a note from them later, and then you ask yourself, well, I wonder how many other people felt like that in the audience. They just didn't come up and articulate it to me. You have that same experience?
Yes. And that is, as a speaker, as you just shared, I mean, that's everything to a speaker. If just one person comes up and says something to us, it makes it all worth it. It makes all the hundreds of thousands of hours behind the curtain in the dark at 2 a.m. rehearsing our talks and doing the work and putting in the prep and the rehearsals. It makes it all worth it if just one person says that this affected their life in a positive way.
Yeah, it's just incredible. Can you take us to one of your people that you've helped, and you can change the name to protect the innocent, where they showed up to you quaking, and you even looked at them and thought, oh my God, I've got a shipwreck here that I'm not sure I can get ready, only to have them go on stage and just like knock it out of the park?
Wow, I have many of those stories. A lot of times, particularly for the TED and TEDx stage, even when people are selected, the doubts set in. And, who am I to give this talk? I was just working with someone for the main TED conference, and it matters because TED is like the Olympics of speaking. It really is. And in order to be at that level, the amount of work and effort, as you well know, that goes into this, it is significant and life-changing in so many cases. So I'm trying to think, one story comes to mind about what not to do. So we had, this was in the early days of producing TEDx in Santa Barbara, and we had a speaker, and I worked with him for about 6 months on his TEDx talk, and it was some heavy lifting. And we got to dress rehearsal the day before, and he did amazing. I was so proud of him. I was so proud of how far he had come. And if we looked back at his very first draft to where he was, it was just night and day, almost like a different person. And so the dress rehearsal went unbelievable. We had our celebration speaker dinner that night. The next day, show day, I'm backstage because I'm always backstage with the speakers. So I'm getting everybody kind of calmed down backstage, breathing with them. And he goes out, and all of a sudden he starts singing opera badly.
And I take it this was not in the 6 months lead up.
No, nowhere. This was not in his talk. And then he went on to topics that I had never heard before. And I was backstage I was white and I was just like, I just jaw dropped. And so what had happened was he had a new girlfriend, a brand new girlfriend who came with him to the rehearsal. And after his dress rehearsal said, I don't really like your talk. I think you should change it. And so the night before his TEDx talk, he changed his talk thanks to his girlfriend. And that's what happened. So don't do that.
Well, I was
please don't do that. Please don't do that.
When you were talking about this, so the setting is you worked with this guy for 6 months and you sweated it out and you weren't sure if you're going to get him there, but you did. The night happens. He walks out on stage and snap, he starts singing opera, and you're in the backstage going, WTF.
Yes, among other things. Yes, I was.
So the struggle really wasn't for him as much as it was for you.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. Well, the struggle was for him because he forgot where he was also, and he lost his place and he went silent, and the crowd was very uncomfortable and they were shifting in their seats, and it was just there was a double struggle there.
Oh my God.
And the shift is, I share this story with other TEDx speakers prior to their talk to say, do not change your talk. Success is not changing your talk the night before your TEDx talk.
I wish I was there. I wish I was there. Having just been at the movies and I saw this movie, Pavarotti's coming out and they have the trailer. Of course, he can sing pretty good opera. So as soon as you said he started singing opera, I immediately thought of Pavarotti. Oh, God, that's funny. That's funny.
Yes, I have stories. Yes.
So most of your work is done in the TED world, but you also teach a lot of executives how to do this, in boardrooms if they're maybe presenting big initiatives to their employees and they're trying to get them enrolled and bought in. Do you change anything, or is it always pretty much the same approach to how you teach storytelling and presentation technique?
As far as the short form story, it holds. And in fact, I have a more challenging time with the executives to convince them that, yes, start with story. Yes, don't just thank people for being there and go talking about the weather, and, start with story. So I really have to be insistent on that. And then it changes their world when they do that. And especially this works great in the nonprofit world. I work with a lot of people who have to give presentations to donors or potential donors. There are speakers that I work with where everything's on the line. They're speaking at the World Economic Forum, or they're speaking at Congress, or they're speaking where everything matters. Everything's on the line. And that's where I love to play. And that's where a story can be transformational in getting your ideas across, because people can connect to stories. Stories bring lessons to life. Story helps people anchor an idea in their brain and form a mental picture so that they never forget what you're saying. And you know this, Park, better than most people in the world because of the work that you do. I mean, story changes everything when you're willing to do that. It's not comfortable. It's not for a lot of people. It's not natural for a lot of people, which is so ironic based on what you were talking about earlier, because we were born to tell stories. We've been telling stories for so long, yet people are really resistant to it. So when you're willing to start with story and allow your audience to trust you and know you through the story, they will be so much better connected to you.
Yeah, really, because that's how we humans connect, but it's so hard. And I would imagine executives that are higher up the food chain that you're working with are going to fight you more than ever on it because they want to look smart. They want to come out and show their logical side,
Yes.
how rational they are, when everyone sitting in that audience are irrational beings that are moved by emotion and story. Right. There's no data. When's the last time you bought anything because of the data?
Right.
You don't. You buy it because of the story, and then you back it up with the data if you have to.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's where my sword work comes in handy. Back to that.
You need to start lopping off limbs when they don't
Yes.
listen to you. Is that
Listen, client, you will start with story. Yes.
Yeah, well, remind me not to get in a knife fight with you too. Awesome. I just so enjoy this conversation. Having you here. In closing, what are 2 or 3 things that you can share with our listeners to say right now after this show? Go and do this just to start getting your brain in this narrative cycle and thinking in story.
Sure. Well,
No pressure there. No, but it's
No,
high stakes. It's high stakes.
I feel quite at home here. Start here. Start with this 5-step methodology that I've created: setting, snap, struggle, shift, success. Plug your stories into this format and try it. If you want to be a great storyteller, tell stories. Get out there. Put this into action. Another challenge
Kymberlee, can I say one thing right there?
Oh, yes.
I have a question for you. Really, when I look through this, it's so simple and clear that if you're writing a story down, each one of these phases could be just simply one sentence, couldn't it? I mean, you could boil it down to a 5-sentence story as long as these things happen in each one of those 5 sentences.
Yes, that's my point. Yes, yes, extra yes, Park. Yes.
One other question then. Does it need to be in this order?
Yes.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. I should have mentioned that. It must be in this order.
Mm-hmm. Totally makes sense. Status quo setup, snap, oops, something happens. Oh my God, struggle. Oh, here's how I'm going to shift to survive this thing. And success is, wow, I didn't realize that could happen that way. Okay, I got you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I would also challenge all of your listeners to make it more interesting. Like I named my year, make your stories more interesting. Challenge yourself. And I do this with all the TEDx speakers I work with. How can you make this paragraph more interesting? How can you make the title of your talk or your story more interesting? How can you make this transition more interesting? The better that you challenge yourself to make it more interesting, the more your audience will love you and thank you for it.
Do you have some tips on how to make it more interesting? Because that's a pretty broad subject, but what should we look for to make it more interesting?
The unexpected. And so particularly in titling your talks and stories, don't go for the low-hanging fruit. Play with opposites or play with variations that we don't normally see. You mentioned Brene Brown earlier. There's power and vulnerability. You don't normally see power and vulnerability in the same sentence, right? They're opposites. And you think, wait, there's no power and vulnerability. I mean, as a martial artist myself, you never show your vulnerability. You have to shield that. You know, you can get killed if you show your vulnerability. You can't do that. Yet she convinces us in her talk that yes, actually, your vulnerability can be your greatest power, and here's how you do it. And so if you think about things in just up-leveling them, giving yourself a challenge of make it funny, make it unexpected, make it shocking, make it exciting to hear and listen to in the setting, for example. Instead of just giving us a random, it was Thursday and I was hungry, you know, what if you told us what you were hungry for? And what if you told us what time it was on Thursday? Make it more interesting to hear. And use yourself as your own best judge. Is it interesting to you?
Mm-hmm. Totally makes sense. I was just thinking about this book I'm reading by Carol S. Pearson called Awakening the Heroes Within. And she talks about the 12 archetypes, personality archetypes that are in all of us, and they express themselves at different stages in our life in different powers. And what occurred to me right there when you were talking about your stories more interesting and how to do that, find the unexpected. This is when the fool archetype comes in, and people think fools, well, who wants to be a fool? Well, the fact of the matter is there's huge power in the fool or jester or trickster archetype, because they are there meant to be in the kingdom, like to help inform a ruler, a ruler archetype that no one else can really talk to. The trickster comes in, the fool comes in and surprises them with these little anecdotes like you're talking about here. And it just occurred to me that makes sense in an audience setting too, because here, whenever you've got an audience setting, if they're not at a comedy movie, they're not expecting to be, laughing or having something surprising coming at them, especially in the business world or bureaucracy. So if you can find that fool archetype in you and trust it, and throw them, a curveball. Have some fun with it. Be very unexpected. You can have incredible power in hooking into their emotion and getting them to come along on your journey.
Incredible every time. I was working with a client recently who was giving an acceptance speech on the world stage in front of 100,000 people live. And she brought me in to help her with it. And she said, okay, well, here's the people I need to thank. I just want to put this in a great order. And I said, okay, well, first of all, we're going to create a TED style talk with your acceptance speech. And we're going to start with story, and she's, oh, no one's ever done an acceptance speech like that before in her industry. And guess what? You are. And sure enough, she started with story, and she brought us through a high stakes, short form style of talk. And I will tell you that the praise that she got, the owners of the organization said in the history of the organization, no one had ever given an acceptance speech that was that powerful.
Isn't that awesome? Yeah, stories hack through the noise and hook our hearts. It's just, just can't, there's no way around it. And it's so much fun to teach people and see them when they have that kind of impact. And especially on the world stage, I haven't been there yet, but it must be very gratifying for you to be able to work with those kinds of folks.
I feel like I'm in the middle of my dreams coming true. I mean, it's just to be able to affect change on a global level by helping people share their most important ideas out into the world and then see the ripple effects of those ideas. I just can't imagine doing anything else with my life.
Well, awesome. Kymberlee, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. We really enjoyed it. Terrific presentation today. Thank you.
You are welcome. It was such a blast to be here.
That's the first time I've ever ended a show by saying, thank you for your presentation. I think you got me so into a TED Talk framework that I always say conversation. So I think that's kind of weird that would just pop up, but great to have you. How can people learn more about you and the incredible work you're doing in high stakes, short form storytelling?
Sure. You can go to my website, which is Kymberlee.com, though my name is spelled funny. So here it is. It's Kym. So Kim, like Jim, like Arnold Schwarzenegger at the gym. Okay, so Kim, Kym, BERLEE, like Bruce Lee, LEE. So Kymberlee.com. And slash short form story. So if you go to the slash short form story section, there's all kinds of great stuff about going deeper into this framework as well as the performance side, because it's one thing to create the story, but also there's the whole delivery of it and performance side. And this is something I'm very, very passionate about. So we have to be able to show our stories as well as create them.
Well, it's incredible. And all I can say is thanks. You've got me now rethinking a lot of the things that I talk about. So my setting is here. We get a chance after you and I connected about 1.5 years ago to finally have you on the show. And I've been viewing you, preparing for this, looking at your methodology and say, hey, this is pretty cool. And I get on and then, oh, snap. Man, this is so simple So easy. It almost feels like some of the stuff I'm teaching is too hard. How can I simplify this in my own life? Struggle. Oh my God, I've been working on the story cycle system for 15 years. It works in brand development, brand story creation, that sort of thing, even communication strategy. But when it comes down to really owning a room in a short, high-stakes, short-form video, I think this is way more powerful. There's my shift. I've got to start figuring out how I can use this a little bit more and proof out that it works, because I think it's incredibly powerful. And the success is, this is, I think, one of my favorite shows we've done in 200 episodes.
Really? Oh, Park, thank you. See, you just made my year. How sweet of you.
And I just used your methodology. It was great.
You sure did.
So
put
there
it to
you go,
the test.
folks.
I love it.
So I have a challenge for our listeners. What I want you to do is, if you are going to be doing a presentation or high-stakes short-form story, go through and do these 5. Kymberlee's methodology here. Write it down and share it. Send it over. You can send it to me at park@businessofstory.com. I'd love to see how it comes together, and I'll share it with Kymberlee as it comes in. And maybe even more important, if you want to have an even bigger impact in the world, if you like what Kymberlee had to say today, share this episode with someone, or with someone's colleagues, friends, someone that maybe has to do a big presentation, or they got a TED or TEDx talk coming up. Share this episode, share her website at Kymberlee.com, and have them pull together their story and first play it off of you, and then send it out to the world and see how it's working with them. I think that would be a great thing, just to see if we can have an exponential impact from this very episode.
I'm in. Let's do it.
I'm in. And of course, if I can help you all, join me over at businessofstory.com, where I am there to help you craft and tell compelling brand stories that actually sell. My job is to help you excel through the stories you tell. See what I did right there, Kymberlee? A little bit of word.
I do.
And thank you for listening. Be sure to come back next Monday, when we will have another amazing story artist like Kymberlee right here on the Business of Story. And until then, remember, the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.